Blessed be the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. Turn our attention to Foxe again. Certain godly persons in Leicester persecuted for the truth. Thus King Richard, by setting William Courtenay, Archbishop of Canterbury, and his fellows upon this, taking sides with the Pope and Romish prelates, became strict and hard against the poor Christians on the other side who followed Wycliffe. Yet during the life of this king, I find none expressly by name who suffered burning. There were some, however, who had been condemned, and some also abjured by the Archbishop and other bishops. They did penance in other places, as well as chiefly about the town of Leicester, as declared in the Archbishop's register and records as follows. At the time the said Archbishop William Courtenay was in his visitation at the town of Leicester, certain persons were detected and accused by the monks and other priests. The names were Roger Dexter, Nicholas Taylor, Richard Watt Wagstaff, William Smith, John Henry, William Parchmenter, and Roger Goldsmith, inhabitants of the town of Leicester. These, with others, were denounced to the Archbishop for holding the opinion of the sacrament of the altar, of auricular confession, and other sacraments contrary to what the Church of Rome preaches and teaches. All of these parties above named, and many others whose names are not known, held these heresies and errors here underwritten and are condemned by the Church of Rome. That in the sacrament of the altar, in the words of consecration, the body of Christ ferments with the material bread. 2, that images should not be worshipped in any case, and that no man should set any candle before them, that no cross should be worshipped, that masses and matins should not be said in the church with a high and loud voice, that the curate or priest taken in any crime can consecrate, hear confessions, or minister any of these sacraments in the church, that the Pope and all prelates in the church cannot bind any man with the sentence of excommunication unless they know him to be excommunicated by God. That no prelate of the church can grant pardons, that every layman may preach and teach the gospel in every place, and it is a sin to give alms or charities to the friars, preachers, minorities, Augustinians, or Carmelites, that no offering should be used at the funerals of the dead, that it is not necessary to confess one's sins to the priest, that every good man, even if he is unlearned, is a priest. They taught, preached, and affirmed these articles manifestly in the town of Leicester and other adjoining places. whereupon the said Archbishop admonished Roger and Nicholas with the rest to answer him on the next day in the said monastery to the aforesaid articles. The aforesaid Roger and Nicholas with the rest hid themselves out of the way and did not appear. Whereupon the Archbishop, on All Hallows being the first day of November, celebrating the High Mass at the High Altar in the said monastery, being attired in his pontifical robes, denounced as excommunicate and accursed, the said parties with all their inheritance, favors, and counselors, who either had taught, held, or maintained the aforesaid heretical and erroneous conclusions, and did that in a solemn way by ringing the bells, lighting the candles, putting them out again, and throwing them down to the ground, with other circumstances belonging to it. On the morrow, after being All Souls' Day, he sent for all the curates and some laymen of the town of Leicester, to inquire more diligently about the truth of such matters as they knew, and were able to say against any persons, whatever concerning the aforesaid articles, as also against the parties before named, and specified upon their oaths, denouncing every one of them severally by name, to be excommunicated and accursed. He caused them to be excommunicated in divers parish churches in Leicester. And further, the said Archbishop interdicted the whole town of Leicester and all the churches in that town, so long as any of the aforesaid excommunicate persons remained or were within the town, until all the Lollards of the town returned and amended from such heresies and errors, obtaining it the said Archbishop the benefit of absolution. At length it was declared and shown to the Archbishop that there was a certain anchoress named Matilda living within the churchyard of St. Peter's Church of the town of Leicester, infected with the contagion of aforesaid heretics and Lollards, whereupon, after the said bishop had examined her regarding these conclusions, heresies, and errors, and he found that she did not answer plainly and directly to them, but sophistically and subtly, he peremptorily gave and assigned to her a day on which to personally appear before him in the monastery of St. James at Northampton, to answer fully the said articles, heresies, and errors, which was the 6th of November, 1393. They commanded the abbot of the monastery of Pratis that the door of the recuse in which Matilda stayed should be open, and that till his return he should cause her to be put in safe custody. That done, he sent forth this mandate against the Lollards in this form: William, by the permission of God, to his well-beloved sons, the mayor and bailiffs of the town of Leicester Diocese, greeting. We have lately received the king's letter, graciously granted to us for the defense of the Catholic faith in these following words. Richard, by the grace of God, King of England and of France, we, on behalf of the Holy Mother, the Church, by the King's authority, have said, require of you that you cause the same Roger, William, and Roger, and the rest to be arrested and sent to us, so that they, with their pernicious doctrine, do not infect the people of God, given under our seal. Another instrument in the same register mentions one Margaret Gailey, a nun, who had forsaken her order. She was constrained by the Archbishop against her will to enter the order again, as appears in the following instrument. William, by the grace of God, or Reverend Brother of God John, by the grace of God, Bishop of Ely, greeting. In the visitation of our Diocese of Lincoln, according to our office, among other enormities worthy of reformation, we found one sheep strayed out of the fold and entangled among the briars. To wit, Mary Gailey, a professed nun in the monastery of St. Rodigon within your diocese. Casting off the habit of a religion, she was found in secular attire, being apostate for many years and leading a dissolute life, unless her blood be required at our hands. You have caused her to be taken and brought to you, being her pastor. We straitly enjoin you by these presents, we command that you admit the same Margaret again into her aforesaid monastery, and will return against her will, or else into some other place which you think most convenient for her soul's health. And that from henceforth she be safely kept, and in the straight exam of her will yield an account given under our seal. With sundry other instruments in the same register, I find that Matilda the anchoress, upon straight examination and handling of the bishop, before whom she was peremptorily enjoined to appear, was taken out of the recluse that till that day of appearance, and committed to safe custody, as you heard, retracted and recanted her aforesaid articles and opinions. For this she was enjoined 40 days of penance, and was again admitted into a recluse in Leicester. And by another letter of the Archbishop to the Dean of the Cathedral of the Church of Our Lady Leicester, I find that those of 8 persons listed earlier, the Archbishop at High Mass in pontifical robes, so solemnly cursed with bell, book, and candle, after the process against them, or else being apprehended and taken in meantime. 2 of them recanted their opinions, to wit, William Smith and Roger Dexter. But in the meantime, Alice, the wife of Roger Dexter, had abjured the same. However, whether they presented themselves willing or were brought against their wills, as most likely it was, hard penance was enjoined on them before they were absolved. The words of the penitential instrument are as follows. Seeing that a Holy Mother of the Church does not deny her lap to any penitent child returning to her unity, but rather proffers to them the same, we therefore receive William, Roger, and Alice to grace. And further, we have caused them to abjure all, in singular, the foresaid articles and opinions, before they receive from us the benefit of absolution, and were loosed from the sentence of excommunication in which they were snarled. joining them to penance according to the quantity of the crime in the following form. That is to say that the Sunday next after their returning to their proper goods, said William, Roger, and Alice, holding every one of them an image of the crucifix in their hands, and every one in their left hands holding a taper of wax, weighing half the pound of weight in their shirts, go before the cross 3 times during the procession of the Cathedral Church of Our Lady of Leicester. That is to say, in the beginning of the procession, in the middle of the procession, and at the latter end of the procession, with the honor of him that was crucified, and the memorial of his passion, and to the honor of the Virgin his mother, who also devoutly bowing their knees and kneeling shall kiss the same crucifix so held in their hands. So at the same procession entering again into the church, they shall stand during the entire time of the Holy Mass before the image of the cross, with their tapers and crosses in their hand. And when the Mass is ended, the said William, Roger, and Alice shall offer to him who celebrated the Mass that day. Then upon the next ensuing Sunday, the said William, Roger, and Alice shall in the full and public market within the town of Leicester stand in like manner in their shirts, without any more clothes on their bodies, holding the foresaid crosses in their right hands. They shall devoutly kiss these crosses 3 times during the market, reverently kneeling upon their knees. That is, in the beginning of the market, in the middle of the market, and at the end of the market. And the said William, because he somewhat understands the Latin tongue, shall say this anthem with the collect, Holy Catherine. And the foresaid Roger and Alice, being unlearned, shall devoutly a Paternoster and an Ave Maria. Thirdly, the Sunday next after, said William, Roger, and Alice in their parish church of the said town of Leicester shall stand and do upon the Sunday before, just as they stood and did in the Cathedral Church of Our Lady, which done, the foresaid William, Roger, and Alice after Mass shall offer to the priest or chaplain who celebrated the Mass, with all humility and reverence, the wax tapers, which they shall carry in their hands. Because of the current cold weather, lest the foresaid penitents might perhaps take some bodily hurt standing naked for so long, being mindful to partly moderate our rigor, we give leave that after their entrance into the church as above mentioned, while they are in the hearing of the foresaid masses, they may put on necessary garments to keep them from cold, so that their heads and feet notwithstanding are bare and covered. We therefore will and command you, together and apart, you pronounce the said William, Roger, and Alice to be absolved and restored again to the unity of our Holy Mother. Given at Dorchester the 17th of November in the year 1389. To the above narration, we will enjoin the history of Peter Patchell, an Augustinian friar, obtaining by the Pope's privilege, through means of Walter Diss, confessor to the Duke of Lancaster, the liberty to change his coat and religious order. And hearing the doctrine of John Wycliffe and others, he began to preach openly and expose the vices of his order in such a way that all men wondered to hear the horrible recital. This being brought to the ears of his order, and 12 of them, coming out of their houses to the place where he was preaching, thought to have stood against him by force. One among them, especially for the zeal of his religion, stood up openly during Peter's preaching and contradicted him as he was preaching in the church of St. Christopher in London. When the faithful Londoners saw this, taking grief at it, they were very angry against the friar, throwing him and his brethren out of the church, whom they had not only beaten and sorely wounded, but they also followed them home to their house, intending to also destroy their mansion with fire. And they would have done so had not one of the sheriffs of London, with two of the friars of that house well known and reputed among Londoners, mitigated their rage and violence with gentle words. After this, Peter Paschal, less disturbed, was desired by the Londoners, since he could not well preach among them, to put in writing what he said and other things, besides these that he knew about the friars. At their request, in writing, he accused the friars of murder committed against several of their brethren. And to make the matter more apparent and credible, he declared the names of those who were murdered, with the names also of their tormentors. Moreover, he named time and place, where and when they were murdered, and where they were buried. He affirmed further they were guilty of horrible sins and traitors both to king and the realm, with many other crimes, which my author, for their tediousness, leaves off reciting. And for the further confutation of the friars, the Londoners caused the accounts to be openly set up at St. Paul's Church door in London. They were read and copied by many. This was done in AD 1387, in the 10th year of King Richard II. Thus it may appear how the gospel of Christ, preached by John Wycliffe and others, began to spread and fructify abroad in London and other places of the realm. And no doubt more would have been done had not William Courtenay, the Archbishop, and other prelates with the king set themselves so forcibly with might and main to withstand the course of it. However, as is said before, I find none were put to death during the reign of King Richard II, whereby it appears about this king that although he cannot utterly be excused for molesting the godly and innocent preachers, he was not so cruel against them as others who came after him. And what he did seemed to proceed by the instigation of the Pope and other bishops, rather than by the consent of his parliament, or the advice of his council about him, or else by his own nature. But whether the doings of this king are to be excused or not, it is undoubted that Queen Anne, his wife, most rightly deserves commendation. At the same time, living with the king, she had the Gospels of Christ translated into English, along with the writings of 4 doctors upon the gospel. Anne was Bohemian born and sister to Wenceslaus, king of Bohemia. She was married to King Richard about the 5th year of his reign and continued with him for 11 years. By the occasion of this, it may not seem improbable that the Bohemians coming in with her or resorting into this realm after her perused and received here the books of John Wycliffe, which afterward they conveyed into Bohemia. The said virtuous Queen Anne, after she had lived with King Richard about 11 years, in the 17th year of his reign, left this mortal life and was buried at Westminster. At her funeral, Thomas Arundel, then Archbishop of York and Lord Chancellor, gave the sermon. In this sermon, as it remains in the Library of Worcester, in his commendation of her, said these words: that there was more joy from her than from any woman he ever knew. For notwithstanding that she was born an alien, she had all 4 Gospels in English, with 4 doctors' comments on them. He affirmed and testified, moreover, that she had sent them to him to examine. He said that they were good and true. And further, with many words of praise, he commended her greatly in that, being so great a lady and also a foreigner, she would humbly study such virtuous books. Also in that sermon, he sharply blamed the negligence of the prelates and other men, going so far that some, he would say, in the morrow, give up the office of chancellor and forsake the world, and fulfill his pastoral office for what he had seen and read in those books. And then they said it had been the best sermon they ever heard. In this sermon of Thomas Arundel, 3 points were to be considered. First, that the Bible should be in English. Second, the virtuous exercise of this godly lady read these books hanging at her girdle, not just for show, but she also seemed by this sermon to be a studious reader of them. The third thing to be noted is what fruit the Archbishop declared he received by hearing and reading these books in the English tongue. How after he gave this sermon and made that promise, this same Thomas Arundel became the cruelest enemy there might be against all English books and their authors, as follows for afterward in his history. We'll bring it to a close. Blessed be your name, Father, Son, and Holy Ghost.